Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to share with you the top 10 most difficult Ark Tames, so let's get into it. In at number 10 we have the Desmodus, and this is just one of those creatures which, albeit isn't going to be the most difficult tame out there, getting those blood bags for that first Desmodus is definitely going to be a challenge, and also just surviving the whole thing and getting to the area where they spawn is quite a challenge as well, especially when there's so many of them all in one place and you just want to tame one of them and you don't want loads and loads of these things after you. And obviously the getting of the blood bags will be a pain, as it will take ages to extract a blood bag like every 5 seconds from your body, but it is definitely well worth the tame. The Desmodus is one of the most useful tames out there, especially for its sanguine elixir, as it is an absolute taming cheat. Next up we have the Blood Stalker, and this has the exact same taming method as the Desmodus, but why is it more difficult? Well, blood bags are not easy to get on Gen 1 in any circumstance at all, as yes, once you tamed your first Desmodus you have yourself a blood bag farm, whereas that simply isn't possible on Gen 1, and you just have to keep doing that same method and getting hundreds and hundreds of blood bags to actually get yourself a really high level Blood Stalker. And these are definitely essential on the Gen 1 map, as they are pretty much the only creature which you can use to get around, as flyers are banned on that map. And they're a pretty good shout on Arboration 2, as flyers also aren't allowed on that map, although you do have creatures like the Rock Drake, whereas on Gen 1 this is your only real creature which you can use to travel around at great speed, like the Rock Drake on Arboration. Now next up we have the Gigar, and I was going to put the Carot in this spot, but I decided to just discount it on the list, as actually that tame isn't too bad, and it can be somewhat friendly compared to the Giga tame, especially considering how little resource you need for that tame, and albeit sometimes it can be buggy, I would say the Giga tame is still just a little bit harder because of the amount of resource you need for this thing. And yes, you can trap this thing pretty easily, and then you just have to stand there and shoot it, and it's not going to be the hardest tame in the world, but obviously it is still going to be a very difficult one. And considering its size and absolute mass as a creature, you kind of expect that. But hundreds and hundreds of trank darts does definitely take a while to get, and it is pretty difficult to get, as crafting all of those narcotics and then all of those arrows is just going to take a lot of time. And if you're breeding this creature on official, then have fun with raising a creature like this for 2 whole weeks. This is why I am never an Ark official player. Now, next up we have the Golem, and this creature is essentially tamed by shooting cannons into this thing's face, or you can use rocket launchers, but it is a lot harder to do it with that method, albeit cannons' mobilities are absolutely terrible, whereas the rocket launcher you can aim pretty easily. It's just more difficult to actually get it to work with the rocket launcher for it to deal enough torpor before the creature actually dies, as the rocket launcher is more of an attacking weapon where no one, absolutely no one, is going to use the cannon to raid a base in a PvP scenario or anything like that. Rocket launchers with homing missiles will probably be used at some point, and they definitely are used to destroy metal bases, but not cannons. That is kind of more of a taming weapon which can be used to tame things like the Golem and also creatures like the Astrocetus as well. And it definitely does make the tame very difficult, as the cannons are hard to aim and very, very expensive. But it is well worth it, as these creatures are absolute beasts of Scorched Earth, and they can tear through any creature that spawns on that map. Now we have the Basilisk, and this is the first Arboration creature on the list, and actually the next 2 creatures after this are Arboration creatures again. Arboration creatures are actually significantly harder to tame than one may think. And in terms of the Basilisk taming method, it seems very simple on paper. Just get some Rock Drake eggs, that's your only real option on Arboration, but you can use Wyvern eggs, and you can use Magmasaur eggs if you want, and then drop them in front of it without aggroing it, and then it will eat them, and then you have yourself a tamed Basilisk. But aggroing it is very easy, and obtaining those eggs, especially Rock Drake eggs on Arboration, is very, very difficult if you don't have a Rock Drake already. And even if you do have a Rock Drake, it still is a challenge to go all the way down into the red zone and get those eggs and bring them back up. The Basilisk is definitely a hard tame, but a very fun one which you should do at some point, as long as it doesn't bug out, but you know, it's Ark. Now we have the Rock Drake, and you may be telling yourself, well, isn't the Basilisk a harder tame as you have to get the eggs and also not de-aggro it? Well, this kind of becomes a more expensive tame, basically just requiring air conditioners to raise it once stolen, but obtaining that egg and also getting it out without a Rock Drake is very difficult, and you can tame the Basilisk if you already have a Rock Drake, and it will make that tame much easier. But if you don't, then the Basilisk tame may be considered a little bit harder, as there are some extra steps, but you do have to raise this creature as well on top of hatching it, so it is a very, very timely process, which is why I'm putting it higher on this list than the Basilisk. But once tamed, this is a creature which is essential on Arboration, and if you are playing Arboration, then you definitely want to tame these things, as this is pretty much your only real way of traveling around the map like you would with a flyer, and it is such great achievement once you obtain one of these things, and it is so worth getting one of these things, and you definitely really should try and get yourself a Rock Drake as soon as you can. Albeit they are very difficult tames, it is definitely attainable to an Ark player with any moderate level of experience. And the Reaper had to be on this list. This creature is one of those tames with an immense amount of steps. Again, somewhat seeming simple on paper, requiring you to get this thing down below 1,000 health, get impregnated by it, and then just raise the Reaper baby. But there are so many little things which you'll need to do in between that. Firstly, finding a Reaper, then building a trap to actually damage down that Reaper, then going up to it and getting impregnated by it, which can lead to you dying if for some reason it doesn't want to do the impregnation thing. You can tell its health is low enough when it has a red glow. Then after that, you need to get loads and loads of XP to get this Reaper to be as strong as possible. Then after it's raised, it's going to kill you so many times, and Reaper pheromone glands are going to be used to kind of put yourself in the position that the Reaper mother would be in. But once tamed, it is well worth it, as these are the beasts of Arboration. They deal so much damage, and no creature can really stand against the Reaper. They're even stronger than the Gigar, really, in my opinion, in terms of force, and they're a lot smaller in terms of their size as well, and they have a hell of a lot more mobility over something like the Gigar. In at number 3 is the Rhinognatha, and these creatures are very irritating and difficult to tame, as their tame method just has a wealth of steps. And on ASE at the moment, and just into the future on ASE, you will just have a hard time finding these things on the island or Lost Island in any swamp biome, as they are incredibly rare. Whereas on ASA, the spawns are somewhat fixed, and they're really not difficult to find at all. So it's significantly harder on the older version of Ark due to their spawns, but you can always just raise your dino count, do the dino wipe command, or anything that helps the spawning of dinos as long as you're on single players. The dino wipes command, if you wanted to know, is destroy wild dinos, if you didn't know that already. Don't just put destroy all dinos. I can't remember what it is. There's a command like destroy dinos. That will destroy your tamed dinos too, and you don't want to do that at all. So destroy wild dinos, and that is going to dino wipe all of the wild creatures on the map. And in terms of this thing's taming method, you'll want to kill a male Rhinognatha to get its pheromone, which is a challenge in itself because they have a lot of health and they pack a punch in terms of damage. Then get a Bronto on all of those items which are on screen if you want 100% effectiveness. The Bronto isn't strictly necessary, just use any kind of large creature, but the Bronto is definitely the advised. Then really you want a net gun for this, so net gun it, and then after that you're going to want to damage this thing down to a really low amount of health, as low as you possibly can. You may need to hit it a couple of extra times. I'm using Awesome Spyglass mod here but that isn't on ASA at the moment, and so isn't the net gun, so you'll need to trap it in that case. And you can always use the magnifying glass if you don't have any kind of mods to see this thing's health. The torpor isn't really necessary. Then you're going to want to feed that pheromone into your Bronto, or whatever creature you're using in this case. I'm not sure what creatures can be used. The Bronto is definitely advised. Then afterwards it will come out of its kind of net trap, and then it will impregnate your dino, which is where you want to feed it all of those resources. Then it will collapse over and your Rhinogonatha baby will be born. In at number 2 is the Shadowman, and this creature really seems like a very, very simple tame on paper, but in fact it isn't at all. This creature just has a wealth of things which can go wrong with it, namely that this creature will just like to aggro onto everything, and you're going to need things like Gilly and probably a trap as well to do this fully successfully, or at least with the most amount of ease. And then getting the fish at the right size as well can just be a challenge in itself, because you know, Ark is Ark. But before we get into number 1, I just want to list a couple of quick honourable mentions which didn't make it onto the list. The Troodon has to be mentioned on this list, so does the Carot, the Noglin, the Astrocetus, the Astrodelphis, the Titanosaur, all of the titans which you'll find on Extinction, the Managama, and the Hesperornis, all having their own varying difficulties in taming methods. So let's get into that number 1 spot. And in at number 1 is the Amargasaurus, and this creature is by far the bane of so many people's lives, requiring Raj Clark 24 hours to actually tame this thing, which is insane for a creature, which is unprecedented for every other Ark tame. No creature has a taming method like this one, and if you do this taming method, in fact, you will probably not be sane by the end of it, allowing it to run around and fight with you until it is tamed. This is the absolute bane of any Ark player's existence. But we can't forget the Fenrir too. This thing is just it's just too difficult. The top 10 most disregarded Ark Tames. In at number 10, we have got the Megalosaurus, and although this creature is widely used on maps like Arboration, I find it could definitely be used a lot more, and it does spawn on maps like the islands. Like, you can go into caves, like the artifact of the Devourer cave, I think has a few, and the artifact of the Massive, or the artifact of the Hunter, I think has a few lying around there. And obviously you can use a Creature Finder Deluxe if that's your thing as well. If you have access to that, it really does help out, especially for you ASA players out there, because it is accessible to everyone. But on normal Ark, if you're a console player, I'm sorry, you won't have access to that. Also, these things do have a wealth of abilities as well, which really does make them quite a special creature to behold. They can just gnash away at small creatures in their mouth with no issues whatsoever. Honestly, it's so easy to kill things like Microraptors. They just simply can't get to you anymore, even though in this case they did. But you know, the thought is there, and I find it often in a lot of scenarios it really does help out, especially when there's not too many of them. If you get loads, then not many creatures are going to be able to ward them off, but the Stego is actually a pretty good shout. But obviously that's not going to be on this list, because the Stego is quite widely used for PvP, and you can actually use this creature for PvP as well. And I know I'm not the biggest PvP player out there, so PvP players out there, feel free to disagree with me if you think this wouldn't be good. But I think considering its size and the damage output, and considering that only is really too useful at night time if you're doing a short raid that is not relatively too difficult, these things can be pretty useful, and they're pretty stealthy creatures. But again, if I got that completely wrong, make sure to comment that down below, as I always do want to know your thoughts. Just for general PvE use, sorry. These creatures are just really great for traversing around the map, great for defeating the Rock Dragon Arboration, obviously just great on Arboration in general, but I think they're really great carnivores that deserve a lot more respect than they already get. Next up on the list, we have got ourselves the Carbenemies, and although this creature seems just like a pretty useless creature which you'll see all over the beaches on maps like the island, it really is one which can be extremely useful in the early stages of the game, just for general use as an underwater mount, and just as a general mount for getting around the area and just having a little explore. Obviously, this creature isn't going to give you the best experience out of every Ark creature, as they are particularly slow, and that can be quite frustrating. But things like Cretzels are slow as well, and they are later game tames, although they are a little bit outdated, and you do find with creatures like this, you really do see their age in some regards. And especially if Wildcard did give these things to TLC, I think it would really boost the amount of players that would be using these things, as they definitely could do with a couple of extra features and abilities to make themselves generally just be better creatures. Maybe they could even get the hydration buff underwater, just something quite simple that would just make these creatures a lot better. But I do find their main use is being your first underwater mount in the game. Yes, their saddle can be a little bit expensive, requiring 10 cementing paste, at least I think it's 10 cementing paste, but they can just be really good in those early stages to get yourself those silica pearls and get yourself some oil. Yes, you can get it from trilobites, but I find if you want to get it in some larger amounts, and also generally just quicker, unless there's just trilobites absolutely everywhere, I find the carb enemies is just the way to go. They're really useful creatures, honestly very disregarded in my opinion, and I wish people use these things more. Sadly they don't, but you know, maybe in the future. Now, as I stated earlier, this video is sponsored by the Ark Echoes of Arcadia Light RP, and I'm really thankful for them reaching out for me. But I want to tell you why this is the best Ark server out there. It is the most immersive RP server by far. I love all of the time that I spent with it on so far. I've thoroughly enjoyed all the playthrough, and that is due to daily and weekly large events. So you get an event daily, but you get a weekly large event. On top of that, there's 9 gigabytes of DLC full conversion, which just adds a whole new way to play. There's a fresh wipe at the moment as well, so if you want to get started, you really can do well. There's over 60 mods, over 75 new creatures. There's all the DLC creatures there. It's on the center. You are going to have the best time on this map. And there's even 12 unique basic classes. And with a server like this, with 100% uptime, there's really nothing that can go wrong. So scan the QR code on screen, or there'll be a link in the description to join the server right away. Next up, we have got ourselves the Blood Stalker. And although this unassuming little creature spawning in the bog biome on Genesis 1 seems like it would be used quite a lot, and although yes, it is actually used reasonably widely among players, the Maywing has sort of taken a place as a better travelling mount out there, but that's actually not why I put it on this list. Contrary to popular belief, I think that the best use for this thing isn't just to be an insane travel mount, but is to be that epic underwater ocean creature that you've all been looking for. At least I've been looking for it, and in my recent Ark exploration, I have found the Blood Stalker is an extremely effective creature for use in underwater travel. It really is one of the most diverse creatures in so many ways, especially again linking back to underwater exploration. They essentially have an awesome spyglass, if you will, where you can see the aggros of all the creatures as well. You can't see their health and stamina and all their other stats and torpor and things like that, but still you can see the aggros of creatures, and especially with the lack of visibility in a place like the ocean, it can be extremely useful to know if you need to evade some danger. Also, these creatures just generally are really useful mounts, and I feel like the Maywing has taken too much of the spotlight, if you will. I know it is a really great creature, but I find that if we have a little bit more creature variety in our life, we can find some better uses for creatures, the Blood Stalker being a great underwater travelling mount, and that's my niche that I find it to be good in. But if you find other niches with creatures by exploring with them, I find it can just be really useful for general game development, especially as a PvE player, but I could see how it would possibly be useful in some PvP scenarios as well. In at number 7, we have got ourselves the Mosasaurus, and this creature is here because I feel like with the Mosa, you might think of it as the king of the sea, the top of the top in the ocean biome, but actually creatures like the Basilisk tend to get used a lot more, and I feel that is a big shame, considering this creature's size and general status that you might think it would have. It really does not in the world of Ark today. And although yes, they can be widely useful for the Moda boss and just generally underwater killing and just destroying everything in the underwater biome, and they're actually pretty decent for underwater caving on the island as well, they really do need something more, and this definitely does come into needing a TLC, but I find they're disregarded a little bit more than they need to be, as they are still pretty decent, very useful creatures of today. But wildcard, I really do urge you to add some more support to this creature, as I do think they need it. They just need that lift to really become some powerful creatures, as they're just other creatures right now which do it a lot better than this thing. Coming up next, we have got ourselves the Velonosaur, and I feel like this humble creature on extinction really does deserve a lot more attention. This thing spawns in the desert dome on the map, and you know, a lot of people did tame it back in the day, and more people did tame Velonosaurs back when Gen 2 came out with the Velonosaurs, and they definitely just show wildcard does give these things a lot of respect, and I don't think they need really any TLC in any regard, you could say. Although the one improvement could be if you level up the melee damage, their spines, you can call them, they will actually scale with the melee damage, because they don't, only your melee attacks will. But maybe you could say that is a little bit too OP, and I think everyone would be using those if you did do that. But still, these deserve a lot more attention. Okay, the Velonosaur is a really nice niche of a creature which you can't really find anywhere else, and you'll find loads of cool uses for it, and I find that is really useful to have. Again, linking back to the Blood Stalker, if you experiment around with loads of creatures in the game, you'll probably find some creatures that you really like using for very specific tasks. And with this thing, it's just generally attacking creatures from afar, and you'll find it just be quite useful as a general traveling mount. At least I have, is you can just quickly kill things off from a good distance away, and it really does aid me in my travels. But obviously you can find your niche with this thing as well. In at number 5, we have got ourselves the Carot Taurus, and I really do want to talk about this creature quite a lot, because I am definitely a Carno lover, so I do have quite a lot of bias. But you know, I do have bias for this whole list, as I am the one making it, although I've factored a little bit of just general things that I have found around, because I don't just want to play into my opinions, although they are largely mine. I do want to know that. I do want to tell you that, sorry. And also, as always, comment down below what your thoughts are on this list, and if you don't agree with it, then put your suggestions down, as I do want to know, and I want to take feedback from my community to kind of aid my videos and make these top 10s more applicable to you and me as well, because obviously I still want to have the reasoning behind all of it, and if there's some good reasoning for some good creatures, then I will definitely probably morph my decisions slightly, and I definitely have had a lot of decisions morphed by you, so keep that coming, because it really does help me as a person, and you know, just getting loads of different views, it's just really nice to have. And I have quite a nice position in a sense, because I just have access to views where some other people maybe don't quite as much as me, especially as personalized as I get it. But speaking about the Carno, and not you guys, although love you guys a lot more than this thing, the Carot Taurus is a creature which deals the bleed damage, and it's relatively fast and agile, and come on, it's really easy to tame. You'll have no issues with it whatsoever, especially on ASA. These things are dead easy to tame, no issues whatsoever. Just kill the parent Carno as long as it has a baby attached, then boom, you just press a button and you've got yourself a Carno. Obviously you can just lead these things into a trap as well. Sometimes you don't even need a trap, just stand on top of a cliff and then just shoot down on it, and then boom, it's really easy to tame these things, and they're really useful, fast, agile creatures. People usually go for arrows instead, but I find it's a good bridge and a nice creature to have. Now, I often find the Cretzel isn't talked about nowadays, and it really does in a lot of ways sadly show its age. This creature is deadlily slow, if that's even a word. Either way, it's a really slow flyer, and it really did work better when flyer speed leveling was a thing. I know ages and ages ago, obviously you can activate it with mods and whatnot, and there's a setting for it nowadays, but all official servers, as far as I'm concerned, do not have this ability anymore, obviously, since that happened, because they're official servers, they keep it official. Either way, these creatures have really just seen a downfall in recent years, as creatures like the Rhinoganatha and the Astrodelphis, the Tropionatus came out. They're just more useful for this kind of job, and although no flyer really does replace the platform saddle that the Cretzel has, it's not really the best that you can get out there, and you can really just get some better solutions than this nowadays, as it really isn't the best creature to fly around on. But if they gave this thing a bit of TLC, then I really think it could do a lot better, and just generally I think it gets a little bit less respect than it deserves, as they still can be quite useful to this day. In at number 3, we have got the Megalodon, and I kind of have to put this creature here in my opinion. I find like the Megalodon is by far like one of my favourite prehistoric creatures, so again I'm going to have a lot of bias here, but I really like this creature in Ark. I've only taken these things for years and years and years. Really did enjoy when they get the TLC as well. That was a nice cool addition for these creatures to have. Showed wildcard, she did have some respect for these ocean beasts, and in a lot of regards I'll say they're better than something like a Mosa, and I use them a hell of a lot more, but I don't see loads of other people using them, and I don't feel like they need too much TLC. They really just do stand alone as their own thing, but I feel like people just skip these things and disregard them, and they're really useful for general underwater travel, for defeating the Mosasaurus on Gen 1, and even underwater caving. And although that can be done with a Barry, I find the Megalodon does work quite effectively. It's just nice to have a Megalodon. It's a really easy to tame, effective, useful underwater mount, and you can do a lot with it. Although its turning circle isn't the greatest, the Wyverns isn't either, so anything about its mobility, you know, there's some really good creatures out there loads of people use that have terrible mobility, although not the strongest argument I've never heard for these things. I really think they could be used a lot more. Speaking of the Barry, in at number 2 we have actually got the Barryonics, and I'm going to put this creature here as with the rise of creatures like the Shadowman, and also just ever since the Thyla's release, this creature has had a decline in uses, and it goes down, I'm pretty sure, year by year. Less people talk about this thing and less people use it, but it is just so useful for doing any kind of caving. I really think it deserves to be on this list 100%. I just don't really see people using these things nowadays and talk to them as much. Again, I've said it before, but I want to repeat it for emphasis, because you know, these creatures are so easy to tame, and although yes, maybe they use fish meat is really not that hard to come by, and you don't need to tame these things up to 100% effectiveness or use all that prime fish meat. Unless you're an official, then it is going to take quite a while, but still, it's not the hardest thing to come by in the game, and it is definitely worth the effort because of their insane caving ability. They're also just generally great carnivores to have traveling around the map, and obviously if you right click or whatever the equivalent second attack button is for you, if you're a console player or mobile player of course, then you can use the spin attack underwater, and it can stun creatures up to the size of a Megalodon. Again, really useful for doing underwater caves. Like I said when I talked about the Megalodon, the Barry is also a great option which can be used, but it's mainly great for caving and also just as a general traveling mount. Again, you can find your niche with this thing, but maybe stick to with what people find this is the best for first and see how you go. And finally, in number 1 we got the Crystal Wyvern, and I'm putting this thing here as Wyverns are heavily used by tons of Ark players, and especially considering Ragnarok, as far as I'm concerned, is still the most popular Ark map out there. Not sure what Fjorda's done to that statistic or not. It's crazy to feel how the Crystal Wyvern gets like no respect compared to the Wyvern, and it is heavily disregarded. In some ways I find that maybe it has an easier taming method, and because of that it has some kind of psychological nocebo that these creatures just generally are worse, but in most cases I find they're better. Loads of you out there have been saying that you really like the Ember Crystal Wyvern. That's your favourite. For me, it's the Blood Crystal Wyvern. Obviously this is a tropical Crystal Wyvern, but still the point stands, it's a Crystal Wyvern, and the B-roll works with what I'm talking about. Either way, these things, yes, maybe they are locked behind a level 60 kind of a barrier to actually tame one. You need to knock out one anyway to get the Primal Crystal. It's really not that hard. Note runs are easy, and that Primal Crystal is so easy to fetch, especially if you have a net gun now, considering all of that exists, and they work just as well as Wyverns, if not better, especially considering the easier tame method. Though they work tons better, and you can get them way earlier on in the game, and their abilities are, you could even say, new for today. They just seem really cool, and nothing really has been done like it since, and I feel like they deserve a lot more credit and success than they've gotten, so that is why I am putting this creature in at number 1. I think it deserves it the most out of any creature in the game.
Now, of course, we must shout out our Patreons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, who are our paid Patreon members at the moment. Thank you for all your support. I really appreciate everyone on this list. Everyone else is, of course, free members. Thanks for the support, though.